iOS is Apple's most popular operating system. After 15 major versions, it must be assumed it's basically perfect now. It isn't. I still found many things that could be better. So, here's another concept of some stuff that could realistically be improved about iOS. And the first thing is the lock screen. The lock screen has remained almost unchanged since the first iPhone. The concept is still the same. An element you must interact with to unlock the phone. At the bottom, date and hour at the top. Well, let's start with the latter. This gigantic element is a bit of a waste of space, I think. In my concept, I pushed it to the right to make space for a complication, like on the Apple Watch. Something else I changed is the lock. Does it need to be this massive? The top left corner is usually where the hour is, but in the lock screen it's, for obvious reasons, vacant. Why not place that information here? After the iPhone X, they also added two buttons, one for the flash and one for the camera. The flash button is, alright, it makes sense, but why do we need a button for the camera? You can already access it with a gesture. At least give us the option to customize what the button does, said every single Apple user ever. In my concept, it doesn't simply open one different app, it has a vertical list of many. But speaking about the camera app, it's bad. Let's break it down. There is this slider at the bottom to change camera mode, which is not exactly ideal, but I can't really think of a better way to show this information without making it all slower to use. But you also have some settings you can tweak. Where are they? Well, you have the toggles for the flash and the live photos up here, not exactly the most reachable place while using only one hand, but what's this little arrow here? What? By toggling the arrow sitting at the top of the screen, new buttons appear at the bottom, replacing the slider to change camera mode. Two of those buttons are also the same ones you can still find at the top. This is needlessly confusing. In my concept, there's no arrow. All the information is visible at any time. It's still presented differently, so it's obvious where each part of the UI begins and ends, but it's all there. I also removed the two buttons at the top because they're simply redundant, and that's it. Something else I wanted to change is the folders. In my concept, they only show 4 bigger icons instead of 9, not only because it looks better, but also because you make the folders. You decide which apps they contain. So it's a bit pointless to show all those tiny icons. By only showing 4, it allows them to look all a bit more distinct, even if you have more folders in the same page. And when you actually open a folder, the UI on the inside should be like the one from the app library, as it simply looks better while showing more apps as well. Speaking of the app library, here I did the exact opposite. Let me explain. The current app library works like this. Each big folder, created automatically by the OS, which you cannot control, save or edit, shows 3 big apps you can tap directly and 4 small icons that when tapped show the complete folder. This kinda works, but I think it can be a bit confusing, especially because basically nothing else in iOS works like this. In my concept, the big folders simply display a 3x3 grid of the apps they contain. Yes, like the old folders of iOS, but in this case it makes sense, because the icons are still big enough to be easily recognized, but not big enough to be tapped directly. It doesn't matter which part of the square you tap, it'll still just open the folder. Yes, it requires the user to always tap twice, once to open the folder, and once inside the folder to select the app, but I think it's worth it. It's trading the speed of using the UI, not even by much, for clarity. And considering the point of the app library is letting you access all those apps you barely even use, speed is not the biggest priority, I think. Something extremely small I wanted to mention. Do you know those system alerts that show at the top? They are pretty cool. Why aren't they used more often? For example, an alert of your phone's charge when you plug it in. And speaking of system alerts, the pop-ups. With iOS 7, Apple completely redesigned iOS, getting rid of every trace of skeuomorphism in favor of a completely flat design. While there still hasn't been another update as massive as that, it would be wrong to say that iOS hasn't changed since. One thing, for example, is clusterization. In iOS 7, many elements were separated by lines, basically. Just look at the old control center. But now, while stuff like the blur is still abundant, elements are usually given hierarchy by shapes. It's all rectangles on top of other rectangles now, and everything is a bit more three-dimensional, but pop-ups still look the same. In my concept, they finally look more consistent, but I also wanted to make them a bit more contextual. This one, for example, is the one you currently get when trying to delete an app. This header is pointless. To get to this prompt, you have already clicked on Remove App. What should be here instead is the app icon, making the pop-up not only a little more interesting to look at, but also more clear. Next, I reposition the cancel button in the top right corner. It's a button that's already present in every pop-up. It makes more sense to bring more attention to the specific actions you can perform here. To exit the pop-up, you can either click on the cancel button or on the blur background, which is a behavior already found tons of times in the OS. But if there is one thing that must be redesigned, is the calendar app. This is just terrible. To start, look at how many controls you have at the top. This is one of the main themes of this concept in general. Everything must be reachable, and this is the exact opposite of that. For the first few years, iOS only ran on iPhones with screens no bigger than 3.5 inches diagonally. Some of the guidelines that were written back then are still here, even though the standard iPhone 13 starts at 6.1 inches. If they really want to make bigger and bigger phones, the UI must adapt. What worked on the first iPhone definitely doesn't work here. For this reason, in my concept, all the controls are at the bottom, with the only exception of the search bar. This specific search bar is used in the app library and the widget section, but I think it should be used a lot more. How it works basically is that when you are at the top of the page, if you want to search something, you don't have to physically tap the bar, simply swipe from top to bottom. Whenever this search bar can be used, I think it should be. Anyway, the calendar has 5 main views, and to navigate them is a nightmare. You've got stuff like the Today button, which does different things or brings you to a different view based on the one you're already in. Why? Then you have this toggle up here transforming the view with all the months into one with just 1 month. What? There's an extremely easier way for this app to work. What actions should the user be able to do? It should be able to add events, obviously. It should be able to change the settings, meaning from which pre-made calendars the app should import stuff like holidays. And then there's the inbox, which I'll leave as it is. Then you have the 5 views of before. All the events, events for today, the current month, all months of the year, and all years. The all months of the year view can be discarded, as the current month view also lets you slide between months, so it's redundant. We are left with 4 views, which are essentially all showing the same stuff from a closer or more distant perspective. This mess of buttons is not needed. Everything can be done with a 4-option slider, like the one from the Photos app. I also placed the actual calendar of the month's view at the bottom, because it's the part you'll realistically interact with the most, and that's it. This is a lot more intuitive in my opinion. So, am I done complaining about stuff as inconsequential as this? Nope! I also made a concept of all the stuff that needs to be changed in watchOS. Check it out if you want. Ciao!